Welcome back, everyone, to Lunchtime Politics. And here's our story in brief. Anambra State Governor Willie Obiano has called on traditional rulers to revise certain cultures and traditions which threaten to undermine growth and development. He was speaking at the inauguration of the 8th session of the State Traditional Rulers Council, which held in Awka, the state capital. The meeting is the first gathering of traditional rulers from the 8 states of the former Eastern region after the Civil War. Well, let's go back to electoral matters. As members of the civil society continue to mount pressure on federal governments to adopt the recommendations of the EU report on the 2019 elections, let's join the Secretary General of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, Mrs. Georgina Dapopo, as we examine the draft from the International Election Observer. Thank you for your time on the program. Now, I know there's been a lot of chatter around the EU recommendations and some other recommendations that have also come out. But then, before this time, we've had homegrown recommendations, if I may call them that. You might recall the Justice Waste panel in 2008. There's also the Ahmed Lemu panel and the Ken Inamani panel. So the question is, we have a plethora of recommendations. Which do we consider first? How do we go about this?
That's an interesting question. I think it's a matter of bringing them all together and adapting them to what we find today in Nigeria, because there's no doubt there's a need for us to seriously review our guidelines and our electoral laws. And I think a lot of that was done at the last electoral act that wasn't signed into, sorry, that wasn't amendment that wasn't signed into law. But be that it may, the EU recommendations covers most of what was covered in the other commissions, the other recommendations by the other committees.
Okay, now let's take a look at... okay, you can land, please. You can land.
So I think there's a need for us to... There's nothing out of the ordinary. There's nothing that we haven't talked about as stakeholders and we haven't addressed that are in the EU recommendations. So I think I agree with those that are agitating for it to be adopted. Okay, so
if I'm getting you correctly, you're saying let's bring all these recommendations together, sort of have some jollof arrangement, and then implement them.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So let's take a look at the Justice Waste panel, for example, some of the recommendations that were made as far back as 2008. One was establishing a commission to deal with electoral offenses. And another recommends that the head of INEC should actually be appointed by the judiciary rather than the president. What's your view on those recommendations?
We have, as IPAC, we're agitating for the unbundling of INEC, because we think as it is right now, it's a bit too bogus, and their duties are too wide. They have to spread themselves thin to be able to do what they need to do and do it well, deliver well on what needs to be done. So we do agree that that is very, very, very important, the unbundling of INEC, have the Electoral Offences Commission, because even before now, the INEC chairman has even complained about the inability of INEC to properly prosecute, investigate and prosecute the electoral offenders, because they don't have the power to investigate. But if we have a commission set aside for that, then to take care of that in that aspect. So we'll not, electoral offenses we have it today will be dealt with, and we'll reduce it and have a system, a cleaner system at the end of the day. And then the other one about having the chairman appointed by the Judicial Commission, that is a bit. There's a need for us, for the Electoral Commission to have some independence from the executive. That is very, very vital. Very, very vital. So okay. I do agree. I subscribe to that.
Okay.
That it should be, they should be independent from the executive.
All right. On a final note, we're counting down to state elections in November, and that's about a few months to go. What do you think we need to tackle first? Fine, they might say we don't have enough time to, bring in all these recommendations. But if we could handle one thing ahead of the election in November, what should that one thing be?
Well, I think INEC is doing that somewhat, because they're already reviewing feedback from the electoral officers, and that's very, very essential. That will help us to be on the right step going forward, because when we go through something like what we just went through the last general elections, there's a need for us to review it, see what we did right and enforce that, see what we did wrong and then make corrections. So INEC is already on the path of doing that already. They're already reviewing what went on in the general elections. And I believe that they'll pick recommendations from there and apply towards the Bayelsa and Kogi elections in November.
Okay, let's hope so. We've been speaking with the Secretary General of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, Mrs. Georgina Dapopo. Thank you so much for your time. Well, Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo will be meeting his American counterpart, that's Mike Pence, that's the United States of America's Vice President, on Wednesday. This was revealed in a statement released by the Senior Special Assistant to the Vice President on Media and Publicity, Mr. Laolu Akonde. Well, the two vice presidents will be discussing matters on economic prospects between Nigeria and the U.S., and it will take place in Washington, D.C. Vice President Osinbajo will also meet other key groups and interests in the country. Well, let's join our correspondent, Gloria Omezoke, from New York, as she gives us more details. Hello, Gloria.
Thank you, Kayode. Good morning, and it's 7 a.m. local time. The weather is quite favorable, thank God. Just a few hours ago, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, met with Nigerian community here in New York. It was quite a robust session as Nigerians had an opportunity to discuss various issues and concerns, many of which bordered on insecurity, education, healthcare, state policing. Many of them expressed fears about how the government will tackle issues of insecurity. As a matter of fact, 60% of the questions bordered on insecurity, which is quite understandable. And also pension matters came up, education, how the government would improve on education. And the Vice President did well to assure Nigerians that the President and the presidency was working hard, especially in this second tenure, to resolve many of these issues. Kidnapping, if you watched my earlier report, you see where the Vice President talked about using state policing to resolve the issue of kidnapping holistically, and he also talked about decentralizing the police, among other strategies they might want to employ in the second tenure. And so it was quite a robust session, I must say. But today, the Vice President is set to meet with the Council on Foreign Relations at their headquarters here in New York. We're expecting that he would be talking about economic matters, investments, prospects, and development opportunities for Nigerians. And don't forget, he will talk about the recently held general elections in Nigeria.
Right.
So 24 hours after that, the Vice President would depart for Washington. He is set to meet with his counterparts, the Vice President of the United States of America, Mr. Mike Pence. This discussion, this meeting is actually the first ever meeting between the two vice presidents. If you recall, President Muhammadu Buhari met with President Donald Trump in 2018, and that was
right.
President Trump's first official visit by an African head of state. And so that meeting discussed on economic prospects and combating terrorism. We're all expecting that this meeting will consolidate on previous meetings or previous discussions, beg your pardon, discussed between the two heads of state in 2018.
All right, Gloria, we will definitely be waiting to get more from you. But so far, you've given us an update of the Vice President's itinerary. We'd like to appreciate your time. We've been speaking with our correspondent, Gloria Omezoke, who joins us live from New York. Well, let's move on to other stories. As a dispute between the local government chairman and state governors continues, the situation is taking a different twist in Imo State, as the state governor, Emeka Ejeoha, is setting up a transition committee to oversee the affairs of the local government across the state. A correspondent from Imo, Iyitok Pekutei, tells us more.
Good afternoon and welcome to Owerri, the Imo State capital. It's been a rainy day here in Owerri, and since yesterday there's been heavy downpour. Well, the last has not been heard of the feud between the Imo State government and the 27 local government chairmen and 605 councillors that were dissolved by the Imo State government. This was following a recommendation by the Imo State House of Assembly to dissolve these local government chairmen on alleged misappropriation of funds and financial misconduct. These dissolved local government chairmen have approached a competent court challenging the powers of the state government in dissolving them. They insist that they remain the democratically elected local government chairman across the 27 local government areas of Imo State. Just last week, the Imo State government went ahead to inaugurate an interim management committee across the 27 local governments with at least 10 members in each local government to handle the affairs of the local government areas. The government mandated these interim management committee to ensure that the programs and policies of the government get to the grassroots. The government says this interim management committee will last for just 6 months, and after which a proper local government election will be conducted. Thank you, and it's back to you in Lagos.
Well, thank you, Tokwe. That's our program for this afternoon. Thank you for watching. I am Kayode Okikiolu.